All right, folks, as you heard, recording is now in progress. I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked off here as people trickle in because you don't want to listen to me, you want to listen to her. So, my name is Brittany. I'm a community library specialist here at Corvallis Benton County Public Library. Thank you all for being here today. It turned into a beautiful spring day out there, so I appreciate you coming down to listen to our review. I'd also like to thank the Random Review Committee, who is about to meet again soon. First week of May, we're meeting. We sit in a room for 5 hours and talk about books and decide which ones we should talk about next year. And sometimes it's a very heated debate about what books should be there. And it's like all good fun, but we appreciate the work that that team puts in. So thank you so much. Thank you to Gary Whitehouse for writing our wonderful press releases. And big thanks to the Friends and Foundation of the library. If you don't know, the Friends not only founded and ran the Random Review series for 30 years, they also coordinate and run the book sales, which are happening this weekend. And all of those funds go to help run things like this. So thank you so much. Speaking of websites, we have our Random Review webpage. You'll find scheduled events, book lists like the ones back there, which are compiled by our volunteer, Gail Gerdeman. So thank you, Gail. And you'll have all the recordings from the past seasons, as well as links to this year's webinars. I do have a little bit of housekeeping to let folks know about. We had a conflict with schedules for May and June's review, so they've swapped. So now May is going to be Covenant of Water, and June is going to be Fire Weather. And there are new bookmarks back there that reflect that change. So if you want to grab some of those.
So these are updated.
If you grabbed it today, yes. Yep. And that's it for me. I'm now going to introduce our lovely reviewer, Dr. Catherine Scollin, who is an associate professor in the Carlson College of Veterinary Medicine at Oregon State University. She grew up in Auburn, New York, in the Finger Lakes region, and completed her undergraduate degree in biology at Arizona State University. Go Sun Devils! Thank you. I know my alma mater. It's fine. And also her Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree at Cornell University. She moved to Corvallis in 2007 to start her 3-year residency in veterinary cardiology at Oregon State University's College of Veterinary Medicine. Following the completion of her residency, she joined the faculty at the College of Vet Med at Oregon State in 2010. She works as a practicing cardiologist in the veterinary teaching hospital, seeing dogs, cats, horses, and other species with heart disease, and also teaches the veterinary students the cardiology sections of their veterinary education. At home, she has a husband, Jared, and 2 dogs, Bash, a French bulldog, and Toby, an English mastiff. She enjoys hiking with the dogs in the McDonald Forest, kayaking around Oregon's waterways, and traveling to visit family across the U.S. So please join me in thanking her.
Mic back on. Perfect. Well, thank you, Brittany, for that lovely introduction. And thank you all for inviting me to participate in the Random Review. I'm very happy to be here. Curious, has anyone had a chance to read the book, The Other Family Doctor? Okay, a few people. Fantastic. Maybe some of you are considering reading the book. Yeah, great. Well, my plan for the next probably 30 to 40 minutes will be to kind of give a brief overview of the book, talk a little bit about the author, Dr. Karen Fine, and then kind of touch on some of the main themes that really stood out to me as I read through the book and kind of my perspective, or at least my experiences as a veterinarian as well. So The Other Family Doctor, it's a memoir by a house call veterinarian that really explores the kind of many aspects of being a veterinarian and kind of the veterinary field in general. So really includes kind of the emotional aspects, the ethical aspects, and just kind of the general professional aspects of the veterinary field overall. The book offers, I would say, reflections on the deep connections between animals and their owners. And it really highlights the human-animal bond and kind of the really significant and intense love between owners and their pets, and how that love is almost always intertwined with loss and with grief. So the author is Dr. Oh, it's gone. It's back. Great. The author is Dr. Karen Fine. She states that she always knew that she wanted to be a veterinarian from the time that she was a very young child. And I think this is a pretty typical experience for most people who go on into the veterinary field. I almost kind of feel like there's probably a kind of bimodal distribution. There are those who knew it when they were a child and they know from the kind of a very young age. And then there's kind of the group who figured it out a little bit later in life. I personally was in the latter group. I didn't put it together until I was in undergrad, that veterinary medicine was probably the career for me, but she feels that she really knew it from a very young age, that this is the only career that she wanted to pursue. She was raised in Massachusetts, although her parents were both from South Africa. They had emigrated to the United States, but much of her extended family remained in South Africa. And when she was 11, her parents had offered her a choice. She could either take a trip to South Africa and spend the summer with her relatives there, or she could put that money instead towards a party for her bat mitzvah when she was 13. And she chose to travel to South Africa, and she really describes that this was kind of a really life-changing experience for her. I don't know, have any of you traveled, done safari in Africa? I mean, it really is. I just did this for the first time last year with my brother, and it truly was just a life-changing trip and experience. And for her, she felt like not only did it really affirm her determination to become a veterinarian, but it also really taught her some important aspects just about the nature of the animal kingdom. So towards the end of their trip, while they're doing safari in Kruger National Park, they see a carcass of an impala that had been pulled up into a tree. And they're in their kind of family car with her relatives. And, at this point she's 12, she's, fairly young overall. And she really kind of feels that she has this realization at that time that, as she says, quote, life exists in concert with death, not in opposition to it, that to love animals and to care for them means recognizing that they always will die. So she kind of has just this really kind of epiphany moment while she's on this trip at a fairly young age. When she was on that trip, and then in addition, kind of during the summers following that, she was able to spend time with her grandfather, who they called Opa, and he was a general practice house call physician, so a human doctor in South Africa, and she got to go on some house calls with him, and she was able to really witness how he was a part of the community, and the information that he gained about his patients by being in their home. So kind of really seeing them in their lifestyle. He could tell if they were taking their medications or not taking their medications by being there in their home. And while it wasn't kind of totally clear for her at that time, these interactions would really eventually kind of shape the way that she practiced as a veterinarian when she got to that point in her career. So, as with many aspiring veterinarians, she was asked both by her parents and I'm imagining probably others, was she sure that she didn't want to go to medical school instead of going to veterinary school? And she knew essentially that both programs are challenging to get into. You study similar subjects, anatomy, physiology. Probably the big difference is there's a much lower expected salary when you come out of veterinary school compared to when you come out of medical school. But even though kind of knowing all of these aspects, she knew she only wanted to pursue veterinary medicine. So she attends Tufts University for veterinary school. When she gets to school, it's kind of the first time she gets her own apartment and she's able to finally adopt her own pet for the first time. So she gets a cat and names it Daiquiri, and has some funny stories just about kind of those first experiences of having her own pet. And she really just describes, the challenges, kind of think about, she really thought of, well, it's really hard to get into vet school. And then when she's there, she discovers it's actually even harder to stay in veterinary school once you've actually gone through the process to be admitted. And so, having experienced veterinary school myself, what she describes is very similar to what I encountered, and I would imagine for most veterinary students. She really talks about the long hours of studying, the setbacks on some exams when you don't do nearly as well as you expected or as hoped, and just the overwhelming amount of material to learn kind of in this short time frame. And the people that you go through this experience with will often become kind of your lifelong friends, having gone through this really kind of intense training program. And so she describes kind of a budding friendship that she has in her first year with a classmate. And she asks her how late she'll be up in case she needs to call her. She's going to go have a dinner and meet with her ex, and she's not really sure how it's going to go. She kind of regrets it, saying that she was going to do it. And her kind of new friend in her class tells her, just remember, I can be at your house in 20 minutes with a bottle of wine. And Karen notes that, this quote for her was, as she put it, one of the finest declarations of friendship she has ever heard. And so being kind of a amateur winemaker myself, I really kind of connected with this of just the idea of, people being there for you and what they're willing to do to provide support. After her first year of veterinary school, she takes a summer job on a dairy farm in upstate New York. I'm kind of curious where it is, being from that region. I was wondering as I read this, like how close it may have been to where I grew up. She wants to get more large animal experience. She didn't really have that coming into that school, and she feels like she needs to expand that. And she really learns when she's on the farm that there, in that setting, that an animal's worth really corresponds to their contribution to the economics of the farm, which is just very different than everything she experienced of having pets, having her own cat, having a pet bird when she was growing up. And I felt this was really true of a lot of veterinary medicine students. They come in with a variety of different experiences, and they may not have experiences of kind of the other aspects of, animals being in a different kind of range of settings. And so, when you come into school, you have to learn that the animals that you may work with have a kind of a wide range of jobs. There's cats and dogs that are truly just family pets. There's dogs that are working animals that are working for police departments or other service animals. There are farm animals whose sole job is, an economic aspect on the farm, but then also farm animals who may be more of a pet. And you kind of really have this kind of wide range. And she kind of really felt like this really kind of opened up her eyes to really the very big range of possibilities of the animals you encounter. So after completing her veterinary degree, she starts working in a small animal practice as a new graduate, and immediately she really feels the pressure of being a doctor. And she kind of describes this, during the day. As a new graduate, she's seeing a new appointment every 15 minutes. And she's really trying to kind of get her feet under her of, she learned all these things in school and trying to really put them in practice. And during the day when she's there, she can consult with her fellow veterinarians. She can consult and chat with the nursing staff. And whenever she has some uncertainty of kind of what's the right next step or what should she do. And she describes really feeling the pressure when she's on call at night. So she has these on-call shifts where if she receives a call, she meets the client and the patient, at the clinic alone in the middle of the night. And she basically doesn't really have anyone to ask or kind of go over her thoughts. And she's really kind of terrified in those moments of making the wrong call. And so she really kind of goes through this of just kind of grappling with that aspect. And I think for me, I could certainly relate to this. And I think even if you're not in the veterinary profession, you can really relate to that feeling of, if you've trained for something, you've learned this set of skills or information, and then this kind of immense pressure of really putting it into practice. And she really kind of felt that in those early days as a new graduate, that basically every decision kind of felt like it was life or death, essentially. And so at this time, she's also really learning how to handle the aspects of finances and the constraints of finances as it relates to veterinary medicine. As a veterinary student, you get exposed to that, you kind of see it, but you're really not the one making the decisions. You don't have that responsibility of being the one to make the decisions. And so, as a new grad, it can be challenging to decide, which diagnostic test, if there's 3 tests we could do, but really only one is on the table of what can be done, of trying to decide, which is the one that's the most important, that's going to give us the most information. And she talks about kind of, she has to come to terms with the fact that even if she can do absolutely everything, there are some patients that cannot be fixed, even if there's an unlimited amount of resources, that there are some that just have an illness that cannot be fixed overall. And she decided she had to really kind of put a limit on how much pressure she put on herself, and that the death of a patient didn't necessarily mean that she failed, but this was something she really kind of struggled with, particularly early on. And so following the footsteps of her grandfather, kind of a few years into practice, she decides to open a house call practice. And she really enjoys the aspect of seeing the patients in their home environment with their owners. And although she discovers that really comes with its own challenges, she doesn't have an assistant when she's on these appointments to help hold the pets. So she's trying to hold the pets or have the owners hold the pets. Sometimes the pet was, contained before she arrives, but not always, or sometimes they were contained and they get out. And so she is at times kind of struggling to corral them and get them in a place where she can do her physical exam. And she's doing all the kind of appointment bookings and the finances for this business herself. So she's kind of discovering just new challenges that come even with this aspect of the house call portion that she really enjoys. And so kind of over time, her career really kind of settles into a mixture of house call practice where she's going to their homes, and then she's still doing some visits in a clinic. So she kind of has a mix of both worlds of kind of being out on her own for some of her appointments, and then in a clinic where she can still kind of consult and talk to her kind of veterinary team members about different cases. So as far as kind of the style and the content of the book, for the tone of the book, I really found the tone of the book to be warm and compassionate and accessible. I felt like it really blends together the professional and more medical information kind of about the patients, with personal stories kind of about the owners and the pets, and with a lot of humor overall. She really describes with kind of care and compassion, the interactions that she has, over the years with the clients. There's some clients that are kind of repeatedly pop up through the book that she has numerous interactions with, other ones where she only has one interactions. And then also her interactions with others in the veterinary profession, the reception staff, the nurses, the assistants, kind of the whole team that's there. The style is narrative, so it's really primarily stories from her career, kind of alongside with her reflections on these emotional and ethical aspects of veterinary work. So I personally found it really engaging and relatable, to both veterinarians and to pet owners. For me, I thought there was enough medical information that I didn't feel like it kind of glossed over the medical aspects, about the patients that she was writing about. But she's really able to relay the information so anyone could understand it. So you really don't need a medical background to follow along and to really enjoy the stories that she's telling about her patients. So for me, I took away kind of the following 5 themes when I was reading through The Other Family Doctor, and we'll kind of talk about each one of them individually. So kind of the intensity of the human animal, and put in there the veterinarian bond. So kind of the team of people who are all involved in the care for this pet. And then the emotional and ethical challenges that she brings up that we encounter in veterinary medicine. And then the toll of veterinary work that it takes kind of on everyone that's in the veterinary field. And then grief, which kind of comes up in a number of situations throughout the book. And then finally, she talks about this kind of somewhat emerging more idea of narrative medicine, kind of looking at the whole picture of a pet or a person when it comes to kind of medical care for them. So as far as the human, animal, and veterinary bond, I thought Dr. Fine really relays the intensity of the human-animal bond through, lots of stories about the patients and the owners. She kind of laughs that the human-animal bond wasn't really discussed very much during veterinary school. She talks that she had one small class, didn't really seem like it was particularly critical. She kind of jokes that she and her classmates were kind of passing notes that, and I would say that would be similar. We did not have an intense curriculum on the human-animal bond. And she really finds that once she's a practicing doctor, it's relevant to her work every single day, that the human-animal bond really guided every decision that clients made about their pets and therefore made about her patients. And I would say I would agree with that. It seems like it's, touched on in school, and perhaps I went to school a little bit ago, so maybe they have increased this in the curriculum. But it still seems like, it's kind of really, the curriculum really focuses on the medicine and sometimes misses these kind of more kind of softer aspects of being a veterinarian and kind of really paying attention to the real, those aspects of the human-animal bond. As she puts it, the bond between her clients and her patients, as she quotes, could pierce my soul with its simplicity and strength. And I feel like that was something for me that just really rung true of, kind of what we see when we're talking to owners and their pets and they're there together. And you can just, kind of really have this palpable sense of just the intensity of the relationship that they can have. So really seeing this unconditional love as owners accept their pets, despite all the things that our pets do that don't make having them easy overall. And in return, seeing that these animals and these pets really accept us as who we are. And I think, in the clinic every day, even more so when Dr. Fine is kind of describing the house call visits, when she would really see the owners and the pets in their comfortable home environment, she would really experience seeing this bond. And, I would say seeing, in today, like how much we invest in our pets in both time and preparing medications for them, giving medications to them, preparing food for them, taking them to vet appointments, taking them out for walks, along with the financial investment that we make in our pets, they truly are members of the family. I think for the vast amount of people that have pets, and she kind of really talks about that for some people or at some times in our life, pets are just sort of part of the household. But for other people or at specific times in our life, the connection with a pet may be really truly the central relationship that someone has, really kind of a primal bond. We think about for a person who might be living alone and they have a pet, that pet may truly feel like, the next of kin for them, kind of just this really tight bond that they have. And so she has this quote that really kind of really stood out for me, that our animals' lives are intertwined with our own, physically, emotionally, even spiritually, as they should be, because unless something goes wrong, ours is the only home that they'll ever know. And then, particularly kind of thinking about our relationship both with people and with pets, kind of in this post-COVID era that we're in. She talks about that these days when much of our communication is virtual, it is not only refreshing, but vital to interact with a real live creature. We touch and are touched by our pets. They ground us in both time and place. Our pets see us, really see us, and we see them. They welcome us when we arrive home, and we smile despite the long day. We feel their weight on our laps and our beds. And I thought for me, this kind of just really highlights the tangible aspects of having a pet, when you really can kind of feel their physical presence when they're there with you at home, and kind of the comfort that that brings of their physical presence. So moving on to the kind of emotional and the ethical dilemma, she kind of, these are, I would say, are kind of interspersed throughout the book. They come up in individual stories that she talks about. And, one of the aspects when it comes to ethical dilemmas in veterinary schools, students, initially they're learning from textbook, they're in labs where they're doing more kind of benchtop aspects, but they also need to learn on live animals. And in the time when Dr. Fine was in veterinary school, they were still utilizing terminal surgeries where the patient, the students would do a surgery and the patients were euthanized at the end of that surgery. And this was a situation that she talks about and she really struggled with when she was a student, just really grappling with, what is the price of learning as far as the price of life? And she discusses that at the time, really, no one at her school, whether it was faculty, administration, or really even her other classmates, they didn't talk about it. Basically, no one talked about kind of the emotional toll that this really took on the students, that they knew they had to do this thing. And they, she kind of feels like they were just expected to have this kind of stiff upper lip, do the surgery and kind of move on and, take the learning opportunity. Luckily now terminal surgeries are a teaching tool of the past, and students now do not have to face, this ethical dilemma. But we still utilize some live animals in education. They have to do physical exams, they have to learn how to listen to patients' hearts. And so I think there will always continue to be this challenge of, balancing the use of animals when it comes to teaching and learning, and not overusing them, making sure that it's, safe for them, but also ensuring that the veterinary students are adequately trained before graduation, that they don't have, only, have not had as much handling of live patients before then they go out and they're, practicing veterinarian and haven't received kind of full training. There certainly are a lot more instances now where they're using simulation type aspects to try to minimize the use of live animals, but I think this will, continue to be kind of an ethical dilemma of how much is appropriate and what things do we do is appropriate. Kind of looking at the spectrum of care and affordability, pet insurance has become a much more common aspect over the past 5 to 10 years. But overall, veterinarians still really have to handle the financial cost of medicine in a way that human doctors really don't have to deal with. When we are speaking with clients, we have to review the cost of, each diagnostic test and each treatment to make sure, that we're all on the same page of what's feasible and what's reasonable. And really have options in our mind kind of along this spectrum of care of, if there are constraints, what can we do within those constraints to still get the answers that we need, all the way through to if there's no financial constraints, kind of what's all the things. And so we kind of are always kind of grappling with, what is the spectrum, kind of what's at one end and what's at the other and what's in the middle, and having all those options in mind to be able to offer. And then there are certainly some situations, ethically where it's really challenging to balance the needs of either specific patients, dogs or cats, versus participating in something or perpetuating an issue. And so Dr. Fine talks about a situation where, she gets a call for a house call appointment to do puppy exams for a client that says that they have a kennel. And then when she arrives, she kind of really puts together that this seems much more of a puppy mill situation. There's a lot of puppies. It's, just kind of overwhelming. And she feels that the setting and the care doesn't seem that great. And she really kind of struggles with, should she complete this task? Should she examine these dogs and these puppies, versus, if she does that, is she just perpetuating this problem? But at the same time, she sees all these puppies and she feels like she really has to examine them, has to find out if they need medications, prescribe those medications. She kind of really has an argument with the client because they don't want her to prescribe any medications because it means the puppies can't be sold. And she really just has this struggle with this situation. And I think while it may not happen nearly as commonly, I still think there are times when in an individual pet, we're kind of stuck with, do we help this individual patient? But if we do so, are we perpetuating something that maybe we don't think is the right way to go? And then finally, as far as the emotional and ethical dilemmas, euthanasia is something we'll touch on a few times today. We generally, as veterinarians, view this as a gift that we have in veterinary medicine, that euthanasia comes from the Greek for good death. And in most scenarios, it's comforting essentially to be able to end suffering and pain. But it still comes with an emotional toll. And in some scenarios, veterinarians are asked to euthanize a patient under circumstances that maybe don't fall under that kind of umbrella of ending suffering and pain. And we really need to make ethical judgments about whether that's something we can perform or willing to perform, or kind of what the right choice is. So moving into the kind of toll of veterinary work, because of this intensity of the human-animal bond between the patients and the owners, there can kind of be this constant fear of making the wrong decision or the wrong diagnosis. We're trying to make the best recommendations based on the information that we have available, but at the end of the day, veterinarians are humans, and we see how important our patients are into our client's life, and we can kind of really feel, even well into practice, kind of that pressure of of making sure that we're making the right call. And then as far as kind of taking our worry home, and my husband can attest that I rarely leave my work at home when I get there. And I think this is true of probably most veterinarians. Lucky for him, I don't bring my actual patients home, although I have considered it at times. But I really bring it home emotionally and mentally. And so, when I have a sick patient that is staying at the hospital, I'm thinking about it all night long. I'm thinking about it through dinner. I'm thinking about it through conversations. I'm thinking about it through Jeopardy, which is generally my time to kind of try to let go of things. But if I really have a patient that I'm really worried about, I'm really thinking about it the whole time. And so that certainly can take a toll both on our physical health and then also our relationships kind of outside of work. And then as a profession, I think we have a difficult time setting and maintaining boundaries. So even when I'm, not specifically on call, I kind of feel like I'm always a little bit on call because my family members have dogs and most of my friends have dogs. And when they call or they text me and they have questions, I answer them. And so I laugh. I definitely have at least one friend back from high school where the minute I see a text come in from him, I'm like, something's happening with this dog. And then he's usually like, how are you? And I'm like, I'm great. And he's like, so about my dog. And I'm like, okay, anticipated. But nonetheless, even that, we can help kind of stay connected if I can offer information and the service for them. I would say perhaps one of the, biggest tools is something that, at least for me, really wasn't touched on in veterinary school. And that's how to provide emotional support to our clients when we deliver, a serious diagnosis, a life-threatening diagnosis, or if they're pursuing euthanasia for a beloved pet. We do our best to provide emotional support as our clients are kind of working through the grieving process, but we really aren't trained in this type of work. We really don't get any real structured training on that. And so it's a somewhat kind of learning on the job of figuring out how can you provide support, not overstep the boundaries that you shouldn't step by not being a therapist, not being a social worker, but still really be them for them if they're having kind of an emotional crisis. And, people frequently say, when you tell them you're a veterinarian, they'll say, oh, it must be so hard to euthanize animals. And in general, we're offering a peaceful end when it's needed. And so truly the hard part is not really ending a life, but it's kind of witnessing like there's so much love, so much gratitude, and so much grief that kind of swirl around during that time. And so when we perform a euthanasia, I think as veterinarians, we try to be really truly present in that moment to the best of our ability, really be emotionally aware of what does the animal need, what does the owner need. In many cases, a euthanasia appointment will pop up unexpectedly at a time that we weren't planning for that to happen. We really do our best to kind of give everything that's needed for that appointment. And the hard part is sometimes we have to turn around and then go into the next appointment 15 minutes later, and there can be kind of really no time to recover in between, where you kind of just have to be like, okay, now I have to go see this puppy and give vaccines. And I think that in itself really can kind of take a toll that you don't always get the time that you need to kind of refresh and reflect in between. And it seems that I think kind of these aspects and many others kind of have caused a real problem in veterinary medicine, and that's a high rate of suicide among veterinarians. And so it's been noted that the suicide risk is about 4 times higher in veterinarians than it is in the general public, and that includes it's higher than it is for physicians and dentists. And I think there's a lot of things that contribute to this. Veterinarians are frequently we're perfectionists, we're type A people, we're people pleasers. We leave school usually with a pretty high debt to income ratio, and we can really suffer from compassion fatigue. And certainly there are always the very few and far between, but people that feel like, oh, you're doing it for the money, which most veterinarians can attest we're not. But essentially, we still get to hear that at times, and it really can be, challenging to try to really say, okay, I know that person is just under a lot of stress. I know that they're just in a really hard situation when those type of words come out. And there's definitely a much higher awareness of this now. We talk about it in veterinary school. We bring this up. There's a movement that's called Not One More Vet, which is a nonprofit organization with the mission to really transform mental wellness of veterinary professionals. And so, you know, it really encourages all veterinary professionals, veterinarians, receptionists, technicians, assistants to really talk about the challenges of the work that we're doing, in hopes that, you know, maybe while the factors might not totally change, perhaps our response as individuals and as a profession can change. And then grief, I thought really probably one of the most kind of critical themes throughout the book was grief. And that's really all the various forms of grief as they relate to veterinary medicine. And it's sometimes in the books unrelated to veterinary medicine. So, you know, Dr. Fine really offers some personal stories on what it's like to deliver serious and life-threatening diagnoses and really try to help clients with those emotions and what it's, and then she also has stories of what it's like to receive that information and be on the other side of that. And she talks about anticipatory grief, which is, I guess, something I've really thought about, but not put a name to that, which is, you know, when we know we're going to lose something or someone, you know, after getting this sort of, we've received a, you know, a life-threatening diagnosis, and, you know, how do we handle our emotions when we have that information? How do we handle the time that we'll have, especially, you know, I think often in veterinary medicine, it's somewhat difficult to estimate the time accurately. You don't really know how much time you're going to get. And so she really kind of describes three options with kind of dealing with this anticipatory grief of, you know, if you know you're going to lose a pet, or perhaps if you know you're going to lose a person, you can kind of step back and emotionally detach, knowing that this impending loss is going to be really hard. You can stay the course and kind of maintain the status quo, feel the same about that pet or person. Or she talks about that you can go towards, kind of really lean into, you know, our feelings for them and really embrace the remaining time. And I'd say, unfortunately, the loss of a pet is still considered by, you know, some people to be, you know, quote unquote, not that big of a deal. You know, we still encounter that where this can really cause disenfranchised grief when, you know, a person's grief is not recognized or it's minimized by the people that are in their life and they're in their community, kind of using the phrases of, you know, it's just a cat, get over it, get another cat, why you're still sad about this. And that certainly can be really isolating at a time when people need kind of the most support overall. And so Dr. Fine, you know, she talks about this suggestion that she heard about from a client, where pet owners who are experiencing, you know, the intense grief of losing a pet is to write an obituary for them, which I really hadn't really heard about this until reading this. But then when I was reading, I was like, oh, we just kind of received one of these. And so recently our service on cardiology, we had received a thank you from a client for the care that we had provided. And they included essentially an obituary of their dog. So it really kind of told the story of their dog's life and the 16 years they had together. And we loved reading it. They talked about how their dog had peed in 34 states. And then we all sat there and we were like, well, how many states have we peed in? And we sat there as a service and we basically counted the states, and we kind of, you know, had these few moments where we could really kind of like share in this dog's amazing life and kind of really celebrate it. And then lastly, as far as the themes, Dr. Fine, you know, her experience as a house call veterinarian, kind of watching her grandfather be a house call physician, really piqued her interest in this kind of growing field of narrative medicine, which is to say that we're kind of really trying to understand that every patient has a story and it's bigger than just the short history they give you during the appointment. So kind of learning the story of that pet or as a person as a whole really may help with diagnosis, understanding how they became ill, what kind of therapy might be best for them based on kind of their bigger story and their lifestyle. And so this is kind of really trying to expand doctors' views of our patients to really encompass more than just that short history that we get when you come in and they kind of say, well, what's been happening? And you say, well, for 2 weeks, you know, my pet's been limping, but really kind of giving the bigger history of kind of their overall life. So did I like the book? I think it's probably pretty clear that I did. I did like it. I thought it was very heartfelt and personal. I felt like I could really connect with the stories both as a veterinarian and as a pet owner. I thought it had a really great balance of humor that was really needed because of the moments that were kind of more serious discussions of grief and loss. But I thought the balance of the two, you know, was really kind of well balanced overall. And I thought it really offered a great insight into the veterinary profession for those that are interested in kind of getting, kind of a more of a look. I feel like we as veterinarians always kind of feel that clients want a view of the back of, what's happening. And I feel like this book kind of gives that. It really gives some insight and a window into, what are veterinarians, veterinary professionals, technicians, receptionists, what are they experiencing kind of from their side of the counter, kind of inside the clinic. So who do I think should read it? Who would like it? I think animal lovers, especially pet lovers who have had or really felt a deep bond with their pets. I think essentially they would really enjoy this book. I think anyone who's interested in the more kind of personal side of veterinary medicine and kind of really offering a, kind of a look into that to see, what's it like to, what do you have to do to get into the veterinary field, but on a more personal level, how do things change once you've been there for a while? How do their views change? How do the way that they practice changes? And then I would say any readers that just enjoy a heartfelt memoir with a balance of emotion and humor. So even if you're not that interested in the veterinary field, if you just like reading someone's, good stories about kind of their work overall, I think that they would enjoy this book. And so this was one of the quotes from the book that kind of just really resonated with me. Essentially, I think other than the veterinarians that maybe see tortoises and parrots who live like an unbelievably long time, the rest of us that are essentially mostly seeing dogs and cats and even some larger animals, we're seeing patients with a shorter lifespan than we have. And so as pet owners, we experience this, we might have many pets over our lifetime because our life will hopefully be pretty long and their lifespan just overall is fairly short. So if having a pet is one of life's great joys, then losing a pet is surely one of life's great sorrows. The two are inextricably linked, a yin to yang, neither existing without the other. No joy without sorrow, and no sorrow without joy. And so, when Dr. Fine, she kind of talks about how certain pets can be really central at a time. I definitely, as I was reading this, really kind of, that really resonated with me as far as, this is my dog Emma that I got in veterinary school. So much similar to when Dr. Fine talks about kind of the pets that she gets during vet school. I could really relate to that. Got Emma during my 3rd year of veterinary school. So this is clearly a picture of her when she's a tiny puppy, even before I got her. And then I got an internship in Los Angeles. So she moved with me from Ithaca, New York to Los Angeles, rode in the Penske truck with my sister and I. And then we did LA for 1 year. And then I came here to Corvallis. So she had to get back in the moving truck and drive from LA to Corvallis. And really through all those transitions, she was really kind of the constant essentially that was there. So, I'll show pictures. I love the dogs that I have now, but certainly, my life is more settled. I really don't, I have a different relationship with the dogs I have now than I did with Emma, just from kind of what was happening in my life at the time that I had her. And so I think many of us can likely relate to that. And so these are the dogs I have now. So this is Bash, French Bulldog, giving the side eye, which is a general move for him, and then Toby, the English Mastiff. So I want to thank you for your time and attention and be happy to answer any questions you may have.
I have a comment.
Uh-huh.
So much for this wonderful
Thank you.
presentation. I started Penn State in 1965, and one of my good friends, Linda, wasn't allowed to have pre-vet as a major because women didn't believe
Yeah.
in medicine. So to have you here and reviewing a book written by a woman in vet medicine, realize the whole
Yeah, there has been
come a long way.
there has been a sea change and it's been great.
When did that happen?
So I would say it seems Dr. Fine actually talks about this because she talks about when she was at Tufts, the first 2 years, they actually took not combined classes, but they were in the same building as the medical school. And she talks about how she still very much encountered a lot of sexist comments from the instructors that she had, from the medical students that were there. And so I would say it was really probably more so in the 80s that the percentage really started to flip, where there's now, I mean, now it's essentially probably like 90% of the students are female students. We almost are considering the men as a minority in the class when it comes to, there's very few of them around. She kind of postulates, she thinks that part of that is once kind of the shift happened that men are more likely to go into the medical field because the earning potential is higher overall. And I don't know what the reasoning is behind it, but there certainly has been a big flip. And now veterinary students at the vast majority of college are much higher percentage of women. Yeah.
When you say narrative medicine, would an older term be holistic?
I would say no. So she also talks about, I didn't really talk about this much, but she goes through the training to learn acupuncture, and she learns kind of truly more traditional Chinese medicine, where when I think of holistic, I think of the kind of the combination of some Western practices and some Eastern practices, and that for me would be kind of a more holistic view of medicine. I think the narrative medicine really more is about getting like the bigger picture of the patient, not per se like exactly the style of treatments that will be done, but kind of what's the kind of context of their life that, you might be seeing them for this limp, but what's kind of the bigger picture of how that came about. How the narrative medicine, it was truly new for me. I've not really heard that, but it seems like there's some medical schools that are like, this is, certainly part of their curriculum. There's some master's programs specifically related to narrative medicine. So the kind of hearing about that was definitely something that was quite new to me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I can hardly wait to read the book.
It's really good.
I'm going on safari in 13 months, so I want to hear a little bit about your experience.
Oh, so this was like, I had like the luckiest experience in life. So I have 4 siblings. My brother, that's 2 siblings above me, he works for like this, like kind of tech company in San Francisco. He's like Chandler. When people ask me before what he did, I'd be like, ooh, I don't really know. So he works for this company where the top salespeople get taken on an annual trip. And so around this time last year, he called me to say he had basically made it into the club to go on this trip, and it was at African safari, and his wife wasn't, you get to take a +1, and he was like, my wife Tracy, he was like, she can't go, and he asked me if I wanted to go, and I was like, absolutely. And so it legitimately was an all expense paid trip. I don't think I will ever experience anything like this in my life again. But truly, even if you had to pay for it, it's just so worth it. And so we flew to Cape Town. We spent the first several days in Cape Town, just enjoyed Cape Town, toured around. And then we went into Kruger National Park and spent 2.5 days and we did 5 safari rides. You go generally, like she describes, you get in the safari car early in the morning, and then towards the end of the day, in the middle, you sit and have lunch and hang out. But I mean, I had these expectations. I brought my Sirius binoculars and my camera with my telephoto lens, because I was picturing that everything was going to be far away, and then it wasn't. It's like, it was like, I never took the binoculars out, basically, because everything was like very, very close. There was a couple moments that I was like, okay, I'm a little scared. Because you go in, and I also was picturing we'd be driving around on roads, which started that way, and then they just go off the road. They just drive through the bush, and you're just driving like over bushes and trees. And then within the first animal we saw was a leopard, and my mind was just blown immediately. And it was like just right there, just walking, and they truly weren't bothered by the car. And our guide was great, and they give you the whole spiel. It's like completely open vehicle, like no top, no sides. And he told us, the animals are used to the outline of the vehicle. So he was like, you can't stand up. He's like, don't break the plane, And so then we pulled in, we're literally sitting with like a group of female lions and some male lions. We're like very close. And I was like, okay, this is a little scary. And then the guide, I was sitting in the front seat, and the guide, he was like, well, you can sit up on the edge of the door if you want to get a better angle to take a picture. And I was like, oh, Ryan, you said, do not break the plane of the vehicle. And I'm not gonna, and he was like, I'm telling you, it's okay. And I was like, but you said, like, I'm a rule follower, and you made it very clear that I shouldn't break the plane of the vehicle. And, but it was, it really just was, it's just to see them truly, like all these animals that we've seen in zoos, and really just see them in their natural environment, behaving the way that they would, and seeing them interact. It just was phenomenal. So I could not recommend it highly enough if you get any chance to go and do a safari. It was like kind of on my list, but probably not quite as high as it should have been on my list now that I've actually done it. It was unbelievable. Yeah.
Why are puppy mills still around?
To be honest,
to read that chapter.
Yeah, and I would say, I don't know, I feel like I haven't experienced that, but I'm also not in general practice, but, it still does seem like there are a fair number of people who, basically you can order a puppy online. And I think sometimes they truly are from great, reputable breeders, but then I think it's hard to know. So, and it seems like now with like, I feel like shelters do such a great job of adopting out animals that I don't know that the puppy mills are nearly as big of a thing now. Like I remember growing up walking through the mall and there was always a pet store with puppies and things. And I feel like you don't see that now. And so I think there has been some of a shift where that's not nearly as,
Too much.
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I think you had your hand up as well.
Oh, yeah, the author worked on a dairy farm for a while. What was that like? Cause I understand that some dairy farms, it's not much of a life for the cow.
Yeah, I think so. She describes, she kind of talks a short bit about being there where for her, the hard part she experiences that, she's in the barn and she sees this, a swallow nest and she's sort of like, oh, a swallow nest. And the person who owns the farm sees the swallow nest and is like, oh, absolutely not. I don't want birds in the barn. They're basically like, I don't want bird feces in the barn. And so he just, whacks the nest and sends the baby birds. And she just has an absolute meltdown about it because she's like, I can't believe I just witnessed that. And, and she had to really come to terms to like, this is not an important animal to this person. Like the, importance is the cows. I think there's probably quite a variation of experience when it comes to cows on dairy farms. I think there's a lot of smaller farms and things where they are very well cared for and they have essentially have a good, a good existence while they're there to produce things. And then I think there probably are some situations where perhaps when farms that are really big where that's not the case. And so I think with each thing, there's quite a range of, the cow's experience.
Yeah, that's true of any
Anything.
farming.
Yep.
Any animal farm.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, you gotta understand that it's not Bambi.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Could you talk a little bit about your experience at OSU and especially in cardiology?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I came here in 2007, did my residency. When I went to vet school, I didn't know about specializing. I was like, I'm gonna go to vet school and I'm gonna be a general practitioner. And I learned during vet school, I still remember my first year, one of the first people I met, we're getting our rabies vaccines on like day 2. And he was like, I'm gonna be an internal medicine specialist. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, but that's really nice for you. He is that, which I think is also funny. He knew right when he went to school. But I didn't figure out that I really loved cardiology until the 3rd year of vet school. We did the cardiology section and I was like, oh man, this is all finally really starting to click. The physiology makes sense to me. Like I really get it. And so then I went and did some externships at places that had cardiologists. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's a really great, that seems like a really fun job. You get to do a little bit of surgery, a little bit of imaging. We do ultrasound of the heart. We get to see puppies that have, puppies and kittens that have young heart disease. And then we get to see older patients. And I really enjoy the kind of, I kind of think of it as hospice care. Many of the older patients that we see, we diagnose them with something and they're going to have that, and until it's the end for them. And we're really kind of, really walking with the clients along that experience. And so, I came here for the residency and even then I was like, oh, I think I'll probably go be a private practice cardiologist. I hadn't really thought much about teaching and what that would be like. And then I got clearly some experience teaching when I was in the residency. And then I was like, oh, I actually really love this. This is very fun when you're talking with students and you see the light bulb go off above their head when there's something, when they get it. And I was like, oh, that's actually very fun and rewarding to be a part of that. And so then I lucked out. One of my 2 mentors left in the middle of my 3rd year. And so there was a faculty position open. And so I applied for it and joined the faculty and have really enjoyed it ever since. I tell people when I ask what I do, I say I'm a veterinary cardiologist, but there's many times when I'm at work where I really feel like I'm a teacher, that's my job, even though I sometimes laugh, like I never went to school to be a teacher. I didn't get any training to be a teacher, but I have learned along the way from great mentors to see their teaching style. And so I think of myself in that way as well of, I am a cardiologist, but then I also a teacher at the end of the day. I should be more of a researcher, but it's really hard to fit in all three, to be honest. Although the university would very much like all three.
Questions about the crossover between human doctors and vets. Let's just say an emergency where we weren't worrying about what the laws were. Who would be a vet trying to work on a person or
Oh,
a physician on an
I,
animal? Who would be the most successful?
that's a great question. I think it would be more illegal for the vet to work on the person. I'll tell you, every time I'm on an airplane and they are like, when they say, is there a doctor? And I sit there for the longest time and wait to see if I hear any other dings. Cause I'm like, I might be better than nothing, but I don't know. And I don't know that they really am the person, but I'm like, but if they have absolutely no one, I might be at least slightly more helpful, but so I wait for a long time. And then I've yet to have to actually be like, okay, I think it's me. Usually there's someone else, a nurse or someone. I think what's interesting is I think we, as veterinarians, like I talk to the students all the time about how do the things we're talking about in dogs and cats, how does that compare to what's seen in humans? Because dogs and cats are oftentimes used as animal models for human diseases. So I'm talking about comparative things all the time. I don't think per se that a lot of the human physicians, when they're learning things, are maybe looking as much at the models, unless it's like the specific disease they work on. So I think maybe veterinarians as a whole have a bit of a broader perspective. But I think if it came to like someone was really in crisis, I still think a human doctor, if like a dog was collapsed, could like get their pulse and their respiratory rate and have probably a reasonable idea. I think they wouldn't really know what diseases are likely to be happening in that dog, but they at least could get probably some information. I don't know. Don't put that on the record.
How often are pets, for example, diagnosed with heart problems?
Well, in my service, every day. Yeah, I mean, I would say depending on the species. So what's kind of fun about veterinary medicine is, I see dogs and I can't see cats primarily. We see some horses. Some of them get the same diseases. Some species get completely different diseases. And so in dogs, certainly there's a valve issue that's very common in adult, especially smaller breed dogs, where their valve gets thick and it gets leaky. And so we see, it's really very prevalent. And then there are some other diseases like that are breed specific, like Dobermans have like a very high prevalence of having a heart muscle disease. Like almost 50% of Dobermans will have this heart muscle disease called dilated cardiomyopathy. And so there are some things that are really quite common, especially in certain breeds. In cats, cats, the most common heart disease they get is disease that makes the heart muscle thicker. We have more prevalence at it. It seems like particularly in older cats, it's really quite common, like up to 30% of cats will have that, but it doesn't cause an issue in the majority of them. The vast 70% of them will have just mild disease, and it's really not going to be consequential for them. Our hard part is we diagnose mild disease. Some cats, it will progress, and other cats, it doesn't, and we don't have any great way other than looking with the ultrasound again to see have things changed. But all in all, I feel like, we see generally 4 to 5 cases every single day that either a patient had a heart murmur heard by their family veterinarian, or they had something like a collapse event, or they went to the ER clinic because they were having trouble breathing. And so we see, every day of the week, Monday through Friday, we're seeing several of those cases that come in, most of them from the relatively local area. And then some cases, though, we do some specialized procedures. And so we see dogs that come down from the Seattle area or Southern Oregon, where we have things we can offer that just aren't available at most hospitals, all in all. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you all very much for having me. This was lovely. Wonderful.
Okay.